Well guys, this is not the video that I wanted to make. I am majorly bummed, and I have been for a couple of weeks because I realized that we just weren't going to meet our goals this year. So I had to make the official decision. I had to give other people plenty of time. But basically what it comes down to is the UglyTruck is not going to be ready for the one event that we wanted to run so very badly this year. You see, at the end of last year, I kind of penciled out my goals for 2022 with the UglyTruck. And basically, I wanted to get my 1500 horsepower engine done. I wanted to get some of the safety equipment on the UglyTruck installed, things like a roll cage, drive shaft loops, just stuff to make sure it would be legal and safe to go as fast as we wanted to go at a racetrack. But for that plan to work out and for me to meet my goal, which was the 1st of September, things would have had to have happened a lot faster than they have, honestly. Like, we shipped the motor off to the machine shop in, I think, October of last year. So that's like, what, 10 months ago? And originally we had a goal of 1,000 horsepower. I changed directions soon after I shipped stuff to the machine shop, because you remember, I had all the parts. I had a complete 1,000 horse capable 8.1 based big block ready to go. We just had to do some machine work and put it together. But you know how things go. It's like 1,000 horsepower. Yeah, you can do that with a stock 5.3. So I wanted to push things a little bit further, add another 500 horse on top with a 1,500 horsepower single turbo, now 535 cubic inch Gen 7 big block, still based on the 8.1. But that one decision to push things a little bit further, I had no idea at the time how far back that would set our timetable. You can see here we have ourselves a completely bare short block. I showed you guys, clearancing the timing chain, but I haven't put anything together with this. And you might be wondering why. And unfortunately, the reason is more parts delays. I remember back in October, we ordered new pistons because we wanted a little bit stronger than what we had, new connecting rods. We got the rods in within, a month or so, but the pistons, that was like the major holdup. I don't think we got pistons until late April. And then once we got the pistons, there was just a few things left to do. I got the motor back here. At the very end of June, I got the motor back here, and I'm looking at the calendar and I'm like, crap, I've got basically, I think at the time it was like 7 or 8 weeks to get everything done that I wanted to do. Build the motor, get all the assembly done, get it in the truck, get the tuning done, convert to a different EFI setup, and all this stuff to get the truck ready to go to race week. That was my huge goal for the year, was attending a Race Week 2.0 that starts, I think, September 2nd in Oklahoma. Race Week is a drag and drive event. 2.0 started in Oklahoma, and it went to a couple of other tracks around. Basically, there's 1,000 miles of driving you do with your race vehicle, and then you do a pass at every single track. I signed up for the 11-second index, and I know with this engine, I could have gone a lot faster than an 11-second run. And I remember earlier this year, the sign-up date, I think, was in February, something like that. And there's only like 200 slots available. And of course, they give, preference to people who have already run, veterans of Race Week, they give preference to if they want to sign up again. So I don't know how many slots were available, but I know it wasn't that many. And I was lucky enough, I was one of the guys that got a slot for Race Week 2.0. And I was so ecstatic. I was so pumped and excited. I'm like, we're going racing. No matter what it takes, I am going to make that event happen. I told you guys I would take the Copo truck as my backup. Like, let's say something happened and the UglyTruck stuff wasn't done in time. I could take the Copo truck and still run the event. But one of my mantras on the channel here, and one of my, I call it a life philosophy. One of my philosophies is do everything to the very best of your ability, no matter what. Don't cut corners. Don't do rush jobs. Do everything to the absolute best level of quality that you can. And to be perfectly honest, I just didn't feel like it would be a justification for race week to go with my, Copo truck here. This has got a 4.8 with an LSA blower. It doesn't even run a flat 12-second pass, just like a 12-10. And I had thought about doing a few other odds and ends to the Copo truck, which we are gonna do, that's for another video, but I just didn't feel like it would have been doing my very best going to a race week type of event with a truck that would just be underwhelming. I didn't think it would make good content, and I definitely don't think it would have been worth the financial cost because, it's like a day and a half, 2-day drive from Utah out to Oklahoma. It's, probably by the time I left the house, did race week and came back, it'd be like 7 or 8, maybe 9 nights in a hotel, food costs and fuel, and it didn't make sense to me. I also thought about taking the UglyTruck in its current state because right now, it's still put together. We just ran an 11.6 at Bandimere Speedway in Colorado, which was the fastest the truck has ever gone. And once again, I was so pumped to run that pass. I think that happened at the end of April. And I'm like, we are gonna make race week. We're gonna do our 11.0. Everything is gonna work out just fine. But once again, parts delays. And now that I have all the engine stuff here, you're probably thinking, well, what's going on, LT? You have everything that you need right in front of you to build this engine. But I actually don't. So I showed you guys all the parts, and we won't go over everything, but basically we have the block, we have the heads, we have the complete rotating assembly, we have our 1500 capable, horsepower capable short block ready to be assembled. We've got, the copper head gaskets, we have O-ringed heads. It just has to be cleaned up and assembled. But if you paid attention to the video where I showed all the parts that we're getting, the one thing you might notice that was missing, or there's a handful, but the one major thing is Valvetrain. Remember my whole theory of do it right and do it once? Originally, we were doing a hydraulic roller setup on this, and as we made the decision to go from a 1,000 to 1,500 horsepower build, we also decided to go from a hydraulic roller to a solid roller. It'll be a little more stable valve train, and I just felt like that would have been the right move for this motor. But when it comes to rocker arms, I had a couple of decisions to make. See, I could have put on a stud mount rocker. We did have the studs in the heads enlarged to 7/16 from the 10 millimeter. And I was gonna run a Crowder Enduro rocker arm with an ARP screw-in stud, and then I would have to have had a rocker girdle on there just to kind of help everything be as stable as possible, given the spring pressure that we have with these valve springs. Now, that sounds all well and good, but the one thing about these 8.1 heads, and I believe the Railar heads specifically, is the spacing on the valves, I think, is a little bit different than it is on a Gen 6 or a Mark 5 big block Chevy, which means there are no off-the-shelf stud girdles for an 8.1. So I would have had a custom built setup, and I kind of started penciling out the cost, between the rocker arms, the studs, the girdle, and possibly the custom machining to get the girdle to fit, poly locks and all that good stuff. I think it would have been like somewhere between $1,200 and $1,400. And then I don't think I would have been truly happy with the Valvetrain even at that point. So I started looking, and the next best option would have been a shaft mount rocker system. Now, luckily, I found a company that makes them specifically for the 8.1s and specifically for the Railar aluminum heads. And I was so happy to find that, and I placed the order, but just as we got off the phone, I was like, oh, by the way, what's the lead time on these? And they're like, oh yeah, it's only 20 weeks. So I probably should have been a little more proactive earlier on in this year. As soon as I signed up for race week, I should have got out the credit card and ordered every last part that I would have needed for this engine build. So when the engine came back to me late in June, I could have put this thing together, slammed it in the truck, and hit the road. But there's a lot of factors to that. The engine build is very expensive. I'm trying to balance my desire of doing stuff to the best that I possibly can with my bank account, because of course you have to afford this stuff, right? So unfortunately, the timing of race week this fall is just not gonna work out. The big one is the rocker arms, and even once I get the rocker arms here, I'm gonna have to custom order a set of push rods. And that will kind of wrap up everything inside the motor here. There's probably a few small odds and ends. There's also a few things I'm waiting on in terms of the computer and the wiring and throttle body. There's a few odds and ends which I could have figured out. But between all the parts delays and me wanting to do this right, I didn't want to cut corners. I just said, you know what, let's pull the plug. We're not going to do race week. Now, I made this decision several weeks ago, and I emailed the guys that put on race week, and I told them, because this is it's a very popular event and there's a huge waiting list. I know there's guys out there who want to get into race week who weren't lucky enough to click the button at just the right time on the computer. So I gave up my spot, and I'm sure somebody who's on the waiting list will be happy to take my spot, and I hope they do very well in the event. So, you know, I kind of figured we'll let somebody else do it this time. I'm definitely going to try to sign up. I wanted to do Rocky Mountain Race Week. That happened in June, which of course we weren't ready for that either. But maybe next June we'll be ready for Rocky Mountain, and it'll be closer to the house. And I'm hoping that this waiting will be worth it. I remember the one thing my dad would always tell me, which I hated to hear, was patience. He'd be like, Lawrence, just be patient. Things will happen when they're ready to happen. And, you know, once again, I don't want to cut corners. I think if, like, let's say I put a set of rocker arms in this thing, I probably would have pulled those off and put a shaft mount system in later on down the road anyway. The truck doesn't have all the safety stuff that it probably should, you know, things like a roll cage. That's the big one, drive shaft loops. The transmission, I don't think, even though it is a 4L80 that's sort of refreshed, I don't think it would have held up to this 535 with a turbo. So it just wasn't in the cards. Unfortunately, we're not going to make Race Week 2.0. I'll be watching it, and I'm rooting for whoever's, you know, competing in Race Week, and I want to see some cool fast trucks there. I'll be watching everyone else's videos. But for me, it's just not in the cards this year. But that's all right. Looking forward this fall, you know, my whole timeline has basically been shifted by a year. Now that we have almost everything we need, we're going to start the short block build shortly, probably. We'll get this thing cleaned up. We'll throw the pistons, rods, and crank in there. We'll get that done. And from there, I can't really put the heads on until we get the rocker stuff in, because I want to, you know, I got to measure push rod length, and I got to put some checking springs on the heads and go do all that. But anyway, we'll get the motor build started at some point. We'll get the safety stuff started, because that's another important thing, is I didn't want to be, you know, slowing the truck down. I was in the 11.0 second class, and I know that with this motor, we could have run much, much faster than an 11 flat. I mean, we did an 1166 with the 8.1 that's in there. And this engine is going to be an animal. So I know we could have done much faster than an 11.0, but in its current state, I don't think there's something at 1150. I think it's maybe just like a roll bar you're supposed to have. So we technically wouldn't have been able to do that, and I don't know. So I guess I'm rambling at this point, but we've got a lot of work ahead of us, and unfortunately we've just been bitten by the whole waiting on parts thing. The pistons, that was like the big one. It took, I think by the time we ordered them until the time we received them was like 6 months. So really, really bummed. I was so excited this spring when I actually signed up for Race Week, but it's not going to make it. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you for understanding. And I hope you get my point about the whole wanting to do it once and do it right, because I hate cutting corners. I hate doing rush jobs. And yeah, we probably could have scraped something together, but in my experience, that's when you have all kinds of problems, is when you're just trying to rush something together, slam it together in the last minute just to make an event, and then more than likely something's going to go wrong because we didn't have time to adequately test it. So, yeah, I'm bummed out, guys. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. We got some cool stuff in store. I'm just too sad to tell you about it right now. So anyway, we'll see you soon.